December 17th, 1944, 1:15 p.m., Ardennes Crossroads, Belgium. Sergeant Henry Roy Zack stood in a frozen field with 129 other American soldiers, hands raised, watching German SS troops debate their fate in a language he didn't understand. The fog that had obscured the Ardennes forest all morning was lifting, revealing snow-dusted hills and the dark silhouettes of Panther tanks idling on the road. Zack's unit, Battery B, 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, had been heading south towards St. Vith when Kampfgruppe Piper's spearhead caught them at the crossroads. The brief firefight had lasted minutes. Now they were prisoners, stripped of watches, rings, cigarettes. Germans had searched them twice, taken everything of value. Then Zack heard the distinct mechanical sound of an MG-42 machine gun being cocked. The weapon's 1,200 rounds per minute cyclic rate gave it a tearing buzz that soldiers called Hitler's zipper. He turned toward the sound. The gun opened fire. I dove for the ground, Zack would later recall. Men were falling all around me. The machine guns kept firing. Then I heard pistol shots as SS men walked through the field, shooting anyone who moved. 84 American soldiers died in that field. 43 survived by playing dead, hiding under corpses, or running through gunfire into the forest. The survivors who reached American lines that afternoon carried news that would transform the Battle of the Bulge from a military operation into something far more personal. A war where quarter would no longer be given, where SS prisoners would face summary execution, where revenge became operational doctrine. This is the story of how a war crime changed the character of warfare, how American soldiers answered massacre with massacre, and how the technical and tactical evolution of the Battle of the Bulge became inseparable from the human desire for vengeance. The Ardennes forest had been quiet for months. American commanders called it the Ghost Front, 80 miles of thinly held line where Green divisions trained and veteran divisions rested after brutal campaigns in the Hürtgen forest and at Aachen. On the night of December 15-16, that quiet ended. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along the American front. The barrage, employing 75mm, 88mm, 105mm, 150mm, and massive 310mm railway guns, delivered approximately 50,000 shells in the first 30 minutes, targeting command posts, communication centers, and troop concentrations. The 99th Infantry Division, manning positions along the northern shoulder, took the initial shock. These were soldiers who had arrived in Europe 2 months earlier, many experiencing their first artillery barrage. The psychological effect was devastating. Foxholes collapsed, communication wires severed. Men emerged from their shelters deaf, disoriented, unable to coordinate defense. Behind the artillery came 3 German armies. The 6th SS Panzer Army in the north, commanded by SS Obergruppenführer Sepp Dietrich. The 5th Panzer Army in the center, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army in the south. The strategic objective was Antwerp. Capturing the port would split British and American armies, potentially forcing a separate peace that would allow Germany to concentrate on the Eastern Front. The northern thrust, led by the 6th SS Panzer Army, was considered crucial. Its spearhead was Kampfgruppe Piper, an improvised battle group built around SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper's 1st SS Panzer Regiment, reinforced with elements from multiple SS divisions and the 501st Heavy SS Tank Battalion. On paper, Kampfgruppe Piper fielded approximately 180 armoured vehicles. The reality was closer to 90 operational tanks at the offensive start. Roughly 30 Panzer IV medium tanks with their 75mm Kiwa K40L48 guns, 30 Panther Alf G heavy tanks mounting the fearsome 75mm QRK-42 L-70 that could penetrate 140mm of armour at 1,000 metres, and approximately 30 Tiger II King Tigers from Schwere SS Panzer Abteilung 501, the most powerful tanks in the world, weighing 70 tons, armoured with up to 185mm of frontal protection and armed with the 88mm QRK-43 L-71, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 metres. But numbers and specifications told only part of the story. Piper's route, designated Rollbahn D, would take him through narrow forest roads, across multiple rivers, through villages with streets barely wide enough for a King Tiger's 12-foot 3-inch width. The terrain negated many of his advantages, and fuel was critically short. Germany's synthetic fuel production had been devastated by Allied bombing. The offensive's planners counted on capturing American fuel dumps to sustain the advance. This desperate logistics calculus would shape every decision Piper made, including what to do with prisoners who slowed his advance. Joachim Piper was 29 years old in December 1944, a veteran of campaigns in Poland, France and Russia. His first SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, had earned a reputation for effectiveness and ruthlessness on the Eastern Front. Russian prisoners had been shot routinely. Soviet commissars were executed on capture per standing orders. Villages suspected of partisan activity were burned. This was the doctrine Piper's men had internalized: warfare without quarter, where prisoners were burdens to be eliminated rather than protected, per Geneva Convention. But the Eastern Front's brutality had logic rooted in the ideological nature of that conflict and the partisan warfare that blurred combatant, non-combatant distinctions. Bringing that mentality to the Western Front represented a fundamental miscalculation about American response. The morning of December 17th, Piper's column moved west from Bullingen, where they had captured a small American fuel depot. At Honsfeld, early that morning, approximately 19 American prisoners had been shot after a brief firefight. It barely registered in the chaos of rapid advance. At Bullingen, the Kampfgruppe executed more prisoners. Piper himself later testified that after the Battle of Normandy, my unit was composed of mainly young, fanatical soldiers. A good many of them had lost their parents, their sisters and brothers during the Allied bombing of German cities. They had seen for themselves thousands of mangled corpses after a terror raid had passed. Their hatred of the enemy was such, I swear, I could not always keep it under control. This wasn't an excuse, it was an admission. Piper had created a unit culture where caring for prisoners was viewed as weakness, where speed and shock value mattered more than adherence to laws of war. Battery B, 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, encountered this culture at its worst at 1000 p.m. near the Baugnes crossroads. Captain Roger Mills led Battery B's convoy south from Malmedy towards St. Vith. The unit was rear echelon, field artillery observers equipped with radios, surveying equipment and light weapons. They weren't prepared for tank combat. At the Baugnes crossroads, 2 miles southeast of Malmedy, the lead vehicles spotted German armour. Mills ordered the convoy to turn around, but Panther tanks from Piper's advance guard were already positioned to cut them off. The Panthers, Alf G variants, with 80mm of sloped frontal armour and 75mm guns that could penetrate a Sherman at 1,500 metres, opened fire at near point-blank range. The American trucks and jeeps, thin-skinned soft targets, were shredded. Men dove from vehicles, scrambling for cover that didn't exist. The fight lasted perhaps 10 minutes. American soldiers armed with M1 Garands and a few 50-caliber machine guns faced tanks they couldn't damage. When Germans' infantry dismounted from SDKFZ 251 half-tracks and established firing positions, resistance collapsed. White flags appeared. Hands went up. SS troops herded approximately 130 prisoners into a field adjacent to the Café Baudard Way. The Germans searched them methodically: watches, jewelry, cigarettes, money. Then the Germans began debating. Survivor accounts describe SS officers arguing. The column needed to keep moving. Piper was far ahead, racing toward the Meuse River. Guarding prisoners would slow the advance, but simply leaving armed prisoners in their rear was tactically unsound. Someone made a decision. Witnesses disagree on who ordered the massacre. Piper had already moved ahead with lead elements. SS Sturmbannführer Werner Pötschke commanded the troops at the crossroads. Some accounts claim a single SS soldier fired first, others that orders were given. The result was identical. Machine guns, likely MG-42s, the Wehrmacht's general-purpose machine gun with its distinctively high cyclic rate, opened fire from multiple positions. The 7.92 57mm rounds tore through the tightly packed prisoners. Men fell, screaming. Others ran, were shot running. Some played dead immediately. Then came the coup de grace phase. SS soldiers walked through the field with Walther P38 pistols, shooting anyone who moved, moaned, or appeared alive. The 9mm rounds at point-blank range were instantly fatal. Sergeant Zach survived by playing dead under bodies. I could feel blood from the man on top of me soaking through my uniform. I heard boots walking past, heard shots right next to my head. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. 43 men escaped that field. They stumbled through snow toward Malmedy, encountering American engineers from the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel David Pergrin, commanding the engineers, listened to their accounts and immediately sent reports up the chain of command. By nightfall on December 17th, word of the massacre was spreading through American units across the Ardennes. The news reached frontline soldiers through official and unofficial channels simultaneously. Battalion and regimental commanders received formal reports from higher headquarters describing the massacre and warning that SS units were executing prisoners. But soldiers also heard directly from survivors, from engineers who had found the bodies, from rumor that grew more horrific with each retelling. The psychological impact on American soldiers was immediate and profound. Many had believed, naively perhaps, that fighting Germans was fundamentally different from fighting Japanese. Europeans shared racial heritage, Christian values, Geneva Convention respect. The Malmedy Massacre shattered those assumptions. Private First Class Frederick Clark of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, was among the dead at Baugnes. His body would lie in the snow for 4 weeks before recovery. His death became personal for thousands of soldiers who learned his story, who imagined themselves in that field, hands raised, helpless before machine guns. On December 21st, 4 days after the massacre, the headquarters of the 328th Infantry Regiment issued Fragmentary Order 27 for an attack scheduled the following day. The order included a sentence that would become infamous. No SS troops or paratroopers will be taken prisoner, but will be shot on sight. This wasn't a rogue commander's decision. Similar orders, explicit or implicit, spread through multiple American units. The official U.S. Army history of the Battle of the Bulge acknowledged that it is probable that Germans who attempted to surrender in the days immediately after the 17th ran a greater risk of being killed than earlier in the campaign. The transformation of American tactical doctrine from accepting surrender to summary execution happened rapidly and was rooted in both rage and pragmatic calculation. Soldiers fighting to survive against overwhelming German attacks in brutal winter conditions had limited patience for SS prisoners who had demonstrated they gave no quarter. But there was more at work than simple vengeance. The Battle of the Bulge had become a zero-sum struggle where German victory meant Allied defeat, where there was no middle ground. Hitler himself had ordered battles be executed and fought with the same no-quarter brutality with which the Wehrmacht and the Waffen SS fought the Red Army on the Eastern Front. American soldiers, facing that brutality, adopted it. While rage spread through American ranks, Kampfgruppe Piper's advance was grinding to a halt through a combination of American resistance, terrain constraints, and fuel starvation. Piper had captured the bridge at Stavelot on December 18th after a vicious fight. The 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, the same unit that had sheltered Malmedy survivors, had defended the town with a hodgepodge of combat engineers, cooks, clerks, and whoever could hold a rifle. They delayed Piper for crucial hours, allowing American reinforcements to reach the area. The delays were cumulative and fatal to the German operational timeline. Each hour lost meant American forces were digging in, bringing up armor, establishing defensive positions, and Piper's fuel situation was becoming critical. The King Tigers in particular were logistical nightmares. The Maybach HL-230 P-30 V12 engine produced 700 horsepower but consumed fuel at an appalling rate. The Tiger II's operational range was barely 105 miles on roads, less than 50 miles cross-country. In the Ardennes' narrow roads and winter conditions, fuel consumption skyrocketed. By December 19th, Kampfgruppe Piper had approximately 6 Tiger IIs still operational out of the 11 that had crossed the Amblev River at Stavelot. Mechanical breakdowns, transmission failures, track problems, electrical issues had claimed the rest. The survivors were running on fumes. Stoumont, 2 miles west of Stavelot, became Piper's Waterloo. On December 19th, Piper's Panthers and King Tigers attacked Stoumont at dawn through heavy fog. Defending the town were elements of the U.S. 740th Tank Battalion equipped with M4A1 76W Sherman tanks, the improved Sherman variant with the 76mm M1A1 gun capable of penetrating 88mm of armor at 1,000 yards. The Shermans were outmatched in direct confrontation with King Tigers. The 76mm gun couldn't penetrate a Tiger II's frontal armor even at point-blank range. But Stoumont's narrow streets, heavy fog, and prepared American positions negated the King Tiger's advantages. American tank destroyers, M10s with 3-inch guns, and M36s with 90mm guns were positioned in the town and hidden in nearby woods. Bazooka teams waited in buildings. The fog reduced visibility to less than 100 yards, forcing German tanks to advance blind into a prepared ambush. At approximately 7 a.m., Piper's lead Panther entered Stoumont. An American M10 tank destroyer, hidden behind a building, fired at 75 yards range. The 3-inch armor-piercing round penetrated the Panther's side armor, only 50mm thick compared to its 80mm front plate, and detonated the ammunition. The Panther exploded, blocking the street. More Panthers pushed forward. American fire intensified. Tank guns, bazookas, 57mm anti-tank guns. The Germans couldn't maneuver in the confined space. Panthers that tried to back up found the narrow streets made reversal nearly impossible. Tiger IIs, too wide for side streets, were confined to the main road where American guns had them pre-registered. SS Sturmbannführer Werner Pötschke, the same officer likely responsible for the Ardennes Massacre, led the attack personally. His Panther's turret was jammed by an American hit. Unable to traverse, unable to withdraw, Pötschke's tank became a stationary target. American gunners poured fire into it until the crew bailed out. By mid-morning, Piper had lost multiple Panthers and seen his advance completely stalled. The Americans were fighting with a ferocity Piper hadn't encountered in his Western Front experience. Survivors described enemy soldiers who refused to retreat, who fought to death rather than yield positions, who shot surrendering SS troops without hesitation. Piper withdrew from Stoumont, but there was nowhere to go. American forces were tightening a noose around his Kampfgruppe. Fuel was nearly exhausted, ammunition was running low, and the weather was clearing, which meant Allied aircraft would soon dominate the skies. By December 21st, Kampfgruppe Piper was surrounded at La Gliese, a small village perched on a hillside overlooking the Amblev River valley. Piper's tactical situation was hopeless. He had approximately 800 men, 6 operational King Tigers, 13 operational Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, and about 50 other armored vehicles, including half-tracks and self-propelled guns. But he had almost no fuel, ammunition was severely limited, and American forces completely surrounded his position. The U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, 30th Infantry Division, and elements of the 3rd Armored Division were converging on La Gliese. American artillery, 105mm howitzers, and 155mm long toms had La Gliese registered. Any movement drew immediate fire. On December 22nd, Task Force McGeorge of the 3rd Armored Division attacked from the east. 25 Sherman tanks advanced up the valley toward La Gliese's outskirts. German observers spotted them at 2,000 yards. Extreme range, but well within the King Tiger's capability.
Tiger 213 and Tiger 221, positioned near the Wiermont farm on La Gliese's eastern edge, opened fire. The 88mm Cow K-43 L-71 gun, with its muzzle velocity of 3,280 feet per second, delivered armor-piercing rounds with devastating accuracy at long range. The lead Shermans were hit and disabled. The 76mm frontal armor on even the improved Shermans couldn't resist the 88mm penetration. American tank commanders, recognizing they were outranged and outgunned, withdrew and called for artillery support. For the next hour, American 155mm guns pounded the German positions. Tiger 221's turret traverse mechanism was disabled by a near miss. Tiger 213 took a direct hit that sheared off the front third of its gun barrel, rendering it useless. But the Americans didn't break through. The King Tigers, even damaged, were too formidable. The terrain was too difficult, and Piper's SS troops, veterans of brutal combat, fought with desperate skill. Inside La Glaise, however, the situation was deteriorating. Wounded men lay in makeshift aid stations without adequate medical supplies. Food was running out, ammunition was being rationed, and every day brought heavier American artillery fire. On December 23rd, Piper radioed his situation to headquarters and requested permission to break out. The response authorized withdrawal, but specified he must bring all equipment or destroy it. The SS couldn't allow King Tigers to fall into American hands intact. That night, Piper made his decision. He ordered all vehicles destroyed. Thermite grenades were placed on engine decks. Explosive charges were set in gun breeches. Around midnight, the controlled demolitions began, muffled explosions, as Germany's most powerful tanks were deliberately destroyed to prevent capture. Piper then assembled his survivors, approximately 800 men out of the 5,000 who had begun the offensive. They would escape on foot through American lines, leaving behind everything: 6 King Tigers, 13 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, 45 half-tracks, and countless other vehicles. The material cost was irreplaceable. While Piper escaped on foot, he would reach German lines on Christmas Day. American forces were consolidating control of the northern shoulder of the Bulge, and they were encountering SS prisoners. On January 1st, 1945, elements of the 11th Armored Division, fresh to combat, having just arrived in Europe, were pushing south from Malmedy as part of the counteroffensive to eliminate the German salient. Near the village of Chinon, the division captured approximately 60 German prisoners, including members of the Führerbegleitbrigade and 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division. Some may have been SS. Reports conflict. What happened next mirrors Baugnes with horrifying precision. The prisoners were assembled in a field. Machine guns were set up. Orders were given, or perhaps no orders were needed. The machine guns fired. Approximately 80 German prisoners were killed. Staff Sergeant John W. Faig of B Company, 21st Armored Infantry Battalion, witnessed the massacre. His account, recorded years later, captures the moral complexity. Some of the boys had some prisoners line up. I knew they were going to shoot them, and I hated this business. They marched the prisoners back up the hill to murder them with the rest of the prisoners we had secured that morning. These boys were to be machine-gunned and murdered. We were committing the same crimes we were now accusing the Japs and Germans of doing. But Faig also noted, going back down the road into town, I looked into the fields where the German boys had been shot. Dark, lifeless forms lay in the snow. His account included a crucial detail. He had no knowledge of the Malmedy Massacre at the time, but other soldiers did. The story of Baugnes had spread throughout the American army. Many units had internalized the lesson that SS troops gave no quarter and therefore deserved none. General George S. Patton's diary, discovered decades later, referenced the incident. also murdered 50-odd German medsic. I hope we can conceal this. The official US Army history of the Battle of the Bulge acknowledged that it is probable that Germans who attempted to surrender in the days immediately after December 17th ran a greater risk of being killed than before Malmedy, but claimed there is no evidence that American troops took advantage of orders, implicit or explicit, to kill their SS prisoners. Yet documentary evidence suggests otherwise. The 328th Infantry Regiment's Fragmentary Order 27, no SS troops or paratroopers will be taken prisoner but will be shot on sight, existed in official records. The 90th Infantry Division at the Saar executed Waffen SS prisoners in such a systematic manner late in December 1944 that headquarters had to issue express orders to take Waffen SS soldiers alive so as to be able to obtain information from them. The vengeance for Malmedy was real, systematic, and documented. It was also covered up, rationalized, and ultimately unpunished. The tactical evolution. The Malmedy Massacre and its aftermath transformed American tactical doctrine in subtle but significant ways. First, it hardened frontline attitudes toward SS units specifically. American soldiers had always fought with determination, but after Malmedy, engagements with Waffen SS forces took on an eliminationist character. Surrender was discouraged. Close quarters combat was fought to annihilation. The psychological impact favored American forces. Soldiers who believed the enemy would execute them if captured fought with desperate ferocity. Second, it accelerated information flow about German atrocities. The US Army used Malmedy extensively in intelligence briefings and morale-building efforts. Soldiers were shown photographs of the frozen corpses recovered from Baugnes. The message was explicit. This is what the enemy does. Fight accordingly. Third, it influenced operational planning. Commanders became more willing to authorize maximum force against SS positions. Artillery fire missions against identified SS units were executed without restraint. Close air support requests for strikes on SS formations received priority. The tactical impact was measurable. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, which began the offensive with approximately 19,000 men and 100+ tanks, was destroyed as an effective fighting force. By January 1945, fewer than 8,000 men remained, and tank strength was effectively zero. The division would reconstitute in Hungary, but it never regained its combat effectiveness. On December 30th, soldiers from the 30th Infantry Division reported seeing uneven humps in the snow near the Baugnes crossroads. It wasn't until January 13th, 1945, 4 weeks after the massacre, that American forces fully recovered the area and could examine the site. The cold had preserved the bodies grotesquely. 72 corpses were found within 200 yards of the Café Baudare. More were discovered scattered in nearby fields and woods. Graves registration units documented everything. Bullet wounds to the head indicated execution after the initial shooting. Hands and feet on some bodies showed signs of having been bound. Dog tags allowed identification of 84 victims. The evidence was methodically photographed, catalogued, and prepared for eventual war crimes prosecution. The bodies were frozen solid, requiring careful handling. Many showed evidence of being shot multiple times, the initial machine gun fire, then pistol shots at close range. Medical examiners determined some men had survived the first fusillade, only to be executed as they lay wounded. Private Frederick Clark's body was among those recovered. He would be buried in Gettysburg National Cemetery, his grave a reminder that the Battle of the Bulge's brutality extended beyond tactical combat into deliberate murder. The photographic evidence, bodies in the snow, wounds documented, execution sites measured, would become central to post-war prosecutions. but they also served immediate propaganda purposes. Photographs circulated among American units, reinforcing the message that SS prisoners deserved no mercy. On May 16, 1946, 74 members of the 1st SS Panzer Division stood trial at Dachau, the former concentration camp deliberately chosen for its symbolic weight. Joachim Peiper was the principal defendant, charged with command responsibility for the Malmedy Massacre and numerous other killings of American POWs and Belgian civilians during the Battle of the Bulge. US prosecutors claimed his unit had killed approximately 350 American soldiers and 100 Belgian civilians during the December offensive. The evidence was overwhelming. Survivor testimony from Baugnez, forensic evidence from the recovered bodies, documentation of murders at Honsfeld, Bullingen, and other locations. Belgian civilian witnesses testified about executions of non-combatants. The defense strategy was dual-tracked, claimed the killings occurred in the heat of battle without premeditation, and, more controversially, alleged that US interrogators had tortured confessions from the defendants. The torture allegations centered on interrogator Lieutenant William Pearl, a Prague-born Jewish refugee whose wife had survived Ravensbrück concentration camp. The defense claimed Pearl and his team had beaten defendants, conducted mock executions, and coerced confessions. Senator Joseph McCarthy later championed the defendants' cause, traveling to Germany to investigate the allegations and dramatically calling for Pearl to undergo polygraph testing. The controversy became a Cold War flashpoint. German clerics, including concentration camp survivors, condemned the proceedings. American politicians demanded investigations. The truth was murky. US interrogation techniques in 1945-46 weren't gentle, but the evidence suggests brutality fell short of systematic torture. Confessions included details that could only have come from participants. Physical evidence corroborated testimony. On July 16, 1946, the tribunal delivered verdicts. 43 defendants, including Peiper, were sentenced to death by hanging. 22 received life imprisonment. The remainder received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. But none of the death sentences were carried out. Political pressure mounted. Cold War considerations made German cooperation increasingly important. The trial's procedural irregularities, real or exaggerated, provided justification for commutation. By 1951, most defendants were released. In 1956, Joachim Peiper walked free, the last of the Malmedy defendants to leave prison. Peiper moved to France, settling in the village of Treves in eastern France, living brazenly under his own name. He worked as a translator, maintained correspondence with former SS comrades, and showed no remorse for his wartime actions. On July 14, 1976, Bastille Day, unidentified arsonists set fire to Peiper's house. He died in the flames. His killers were never identified, but the timing and method suggested a deliberate act of vengeance. 32 years delayed, but delivered nonetheless. The Malmedy Massacre's legal aftermath was unsatisfying for everyone. Survivors felt justice was denied. The defendants claimed they were scapegoated for actions common in total war. Germans saw the trials as victors' justice. Americans were divided between those who demanded accountability and those who wanted to move past wartime passions. But the broader impact of Malmedy extended beyond courtroom verdicts. The massacre became a case study in military law, ethics, and the breakdown of Geneva Convention protections during total war. It demonstrated how quickly civilized norms eroded under battlefield stress. It showed how atrocities by one side could trigger reprisal atrocities by the other, creating cycles of brutality that transcended tactical military necessity. For the US Army, Malmedy reinforced the importance of training in laws of war. Post-war doctrine emphasized that maintaining discipline regarding prisoners served strategic interests. Armies that murdered prisoners forfeited moral authority and invited reciprocal brutality. For veterans, Malmedy remained a wound that never fully healed. Survivors like Harold Billow maintained 84 flags in his front yard, one for each man who died at Bulge until his death. The memory of that frozen field, of friends executed with hands raised, never faded. Beyond the moral and legal dimensions, the Battle of the Bulge, with Malmedy as its darkest moment, provided crucial tactical and technical lessons that shaped post-war military development. First, the offensive demonstrated that armor without adequate fuel and logistics was tactically worthless. Kampfgruppe Piper's King Tigers were the world's most powerful tanks, but immobilized by fuel starvation, they were nothing but targets. Post-war tank design increasingly emphasized fuel efficiency and operational range alongside firepower and protection. Second, the battle validated American combined arms doctrine. Shermans couldn't defeat King Tigers in tank versus tank duels, but American forces combined tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, infantry anti-tank weapons, and air power into integrated systems that neutralized German armor advantages. This combined arms approach, refined during the Bulge fighting, became the foundation of Cold War American military doctrine. Third, the fighting demonstrated that tactical excellence couldn't overcome operational and strategic failures. German forces fought with incredible skill and determination, but no amount of tactical brilliance could compensate for inadequate resources, overstretched logistics, and strategic goals that were fundamentally unattainable. Fourth, the massacre demonstrated the importance of military discipline and adherence to laws of war, not from moral idealism, but from practical recognition that atrocities generated responses that degraded military effectiveness. Kampfgruppe Piper's brutality hardened American resistance, eliminated any possibility of local surrenders or cooperation, and ensured that SS troops faced maximum force in every engagement. The Battle of the Bulge cost the United States approximately 81,000 casualties, including 19,000 killed, the bloodiest battle in U.S. Army history. German losses were approximately 100,000 casualties, including 30,000 killed, plus irreplaceable materiel losses. But the numbers don't capture the battle's true significance. The Bulge was Germany's last roll of the dice, a strategic offensive that, if successful, might have prolonged the war by months or even forced Allied negotiations. Its failure guaranteed Germany's defeat within months. And Malmedy, that frozen field where 84 Americans died with hands raised, became the symbol of why that defeat was not just necessary, but just. The Bulge crossroads today is marked by a memorial, a stone wall listing 84 names, a plaque reading, "To the memory of the soldiers of the United States Army who, while prisoners of war, were massacred by Nazi troops on this spot on 17 December 1944. The field where men died is now farmland, peaceful and ordinary. The Café Baudare is gone, replaced by a memorial museum. Tourists visit in summer, taking photographs, trying to reconcile the quiet present with the horrific past. In La Glaise, King Tiger 213 sits in the town square. The tank whose gun was shot off defending the Werimont farm, purchased after the war for a bottle of cognac by Madame Jenny Guinan de Ways and preserved as a memorial. Its 88mm barrel, partially restored with parts from a destroyed Panther, points silently toward the hills where Kampfgruppe Piper made its last stand. These physical artifacts, memorials, preserved tanks, marked battle sites, connect present to past. They allow contemporary visitors to stand where history pivoted, where tactical decisions had strategic consequences, where individual acts of courage or brutality rippled across continents. But the true legacy of Malmedy and the Battle of the Bulge isn't found in monuments or museums. It's in the recognition that modern warfare's technical sophistication doesn't eliminate and may even intensify its human brutality. That soldiers fighting with the world's most advanced weapons still face the most primitive moral choices, whether to give quarter, whether to murder prisoners, whether to answer atrocity with atrocity. The Americans who shot German prisoners at Chinon weren't monsters. They were soldiers pushed beyond breaking points, fighting in brutal conditions against an enemy that had demonstrated it gave no mercy. Their actions were war crimes, but they were war crimes with context. Revenge for Malmedy, rage at German brutality, fear that surrender meant execution. Similarly, the SS soldiers who murdered Americans at Bulge weren't uniquely evil. They were products of a military culture that had normalized brutality, fighting in a desperate offensive where speed mattered more than honor, carrying Eastern Front attitudes into the West. The tragedy is that both could be true simultaneously, that individuals could be both perpetrators and victims, that context could explain without excusing, that understanding moral complexity didn't resolve moral culpability. Sergeant Henry Roy Zack, who survived Bulge by playing dead under corpses, lived until 2002. He bandaged the leg wound he received that day for the rest of his life. The physical scar healed, the psychological one never did. In interviews decades later, Zack struggled to articulate what the massacre meant. "They just shot us down in cold blood," he would say. "We had our hands up. We were prisoners. They murdered us."
By January 25th, 1945, when the last German forces withdrew from the Bulge salient, the strategic picture was clear. Germany had gambled everything on a breakthrough to Antwerp and lost catastrophically. The tactical lessons were equally clear. German armored forces, for all their technical superiority in individual weapon systems, couldn't overcome Allied advantages in logistics, air power, and operational flexibility. The Panther's 75mm gun might outrange the Sherman's 76mm gun by 500 meters. But that advantage was tactically irrelevant when American tank destroyers, artillery, and ground attack aircraft could engage German armor from multiple angles simultaneously. The King Tiger, with its 185mm frontal armor and 88mm gun, represented the pinnacle of German tank design. But it also represented German military thinking's fundamental flaw, the belief that tactical superiority could compensate for strategic weakness. A 70-ton tank with a 105-mile operational range was magnificent in defensive positions where it could use firepower and armor to maximum advantage. But in offensive operations across difficult terrain with inadequate fuel supplies, it was a liability. American doctrine, by contrast, prioritized operational flexibility over individual weapon superiority. The Sherman wasn't the best tank, but it was reliable, producible in enormous numbers, and capable of being effectively integrated with other arms. American armored divisions in the Bulge combined Shermans, tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, mechanized infantry, combat engineers, and fighter bombers into cohesive systems that overwhelmed opponents through combined effects rather than individual superiority. This doctrinal difference was exemplified in a small engagement near Hotten on December 21st, where a single German Panther engaged elements of the US 3rd Armored Division. The Panther destroyed 2 Shermans and damaged a third before an M10 tank destroyer maneuvered to its flank and disabled it with a single 3-inch round through the engine compartment. The Panther's crew bailed out and attempted to reach German lines. American infantry killed them 100 yards from their vehicle. The incident captured the battle's essential dynamic: German tactical excellence defeated by American operational integration. The Panther crew was skilled, their vehicle was superior to any individual American tank, but they were alone, unsupported, facing an enemy that coordinated multiple weapon systems through effective communication and combined arms training. The statistics of the Battle of the Bulge tell a story of industrial-age warfare's brutal arithmetic. American casualties: 19,276 killed, 47,493 wounded, 23,218 missing or captured, approximately 90,000 total casualties from a committed force of roughly 610,000 men.
The casualty rate of approximately 15% was extraordinarily high for a defensive battle that turned into a counteroffensive. German casualties. Conservative estimates placed German losses at 100,000 men, including approximately 30,000 killed, 40,000 wounded, and 30,000 captured or missing. More significantly, Germany lost approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, 1,600 aircraft, and 6,000 vehicles. These material losses were irreplaceable. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Piper's division, began the offensive with approximately 19,000 men and 100+ tanks. By February 1945, it had been reduced to approximately 8,000 men and virtually no operational armor. The division would be reconstituted in Hungary, participate in the failed Lake Balaton offensive, then disintegrate during the Soviet Spring Offensive. Joachim Peiper himself survived the war. Kampfgruppe Peiper's December 24th breakout from La Glaie saw approximately 800 men escape through American lines. They navigated through snow and forest, evading American patrols, reaching German lines on Christmas Day. Peiper had begun the offensive commanding 5,000 men with 180 armored vehicles. He returned with 800 men and nothing else. But numbers, casualties, equipment losses, tactical engagements only partially capture the Battle of the Bulge's significance. The Bulge represented a hinge point where World War II's character changed fundamentally. Before December 1944, American soldiers in the West generally believed German forces would fight conventionally, respecting Geneva Convention protections for prisoners. Malmedy shattered that belief. After December 17th, frontline American units understood that SS formations gave no quarter and therefore deserved none. This transformation had tactical consequences. American soldiers facing SS units fought with eliminationist intent. Surrender was discouraged or refused. Close quarters combat was fought to annihilation. The psychological impact favored American forces. Soldiers who believed the enemy would execute them if captured fought with desperate ferocity that matched or exceeded German aggression. But it also had moral consequences. American forces that executed German prisoners at Chinon and elsewhere weren't aberrations, they were logical responses to Malmedy within the context of total war. When one side abandons rules, the other side faces a choice: maintain moral high ground at tactical disadvantage, or abandon rules reciprocally. Most American units chose reciprocity. The historical record, though incomplete, suggests hundreds of German prisoners were executed without trial during and after the Battle of the Bulge. General Patton's diary entry about hoping to conceal the murder of approximately 50 German prisoners suggests the practice was widespread enough to concern senior commanders. Post-war military justice faced a dilemma. Prosecuting American soldiers for killing SS prisoners meant acknowledging that American forces had committed war crimes. It meant moral equivalence between Malmedy and Chinon, between premeditated massacre and revenge killing. The army chose to let sleeping dogs lie. No American soldiers were prosecuted for killing German prisoners during the Battle of the Bulge. This choice had long-term consequences. It established precedent that revenge killings in response to enemy atrocities would be overlooked. It sent a message that laws of war were negotiable under battlefield stress. It meant that technical military superiority, better weapons, superior logistics, overwhelming firepower coexisted with moral compromises about how those weapons were employed. The weapons systems tested in the Ardennes influenced post-war military development in ways that extended far beyond their immediate tactical applications. The King Tiger, despite being the most powerful tank of World War II, was a dead end. Its massive armor and firepower couldn't compensate for mechanical unreliability, fuel consumption, and immobility. Post-war tank design universally rejected the super heavy tank concept in favor of medium tanks with balanced firepower, protection, and mobility. The Soviet T-54-55, American M48 M60, and British Centurion, the first generation of post-war main battle tanks, all weighed 40 to 50 tons, mounted 90 to 100 mm guns, and emphasized reliability and operational range. These were Sherman's spiritual descendants, not King Tigers. Similarly, the Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck, German infantry anti-tank weapons that proved highly effective in the Bulge fighting, influenced post-war development more than heavy anti-tank guns. The concept of infantry portable weapons capable of defeating main battle tanks became central to Cold War doctrine. The American M20 Super Bazooka, Soviet RPG series, and subsequent generations of anti-tank guided missiles all descended from weapons first employed effectively in the Ardennes. The tactical lesson was clear. Distributed lethality, giving infantry the ability to threaten armor, was more valuable than concentrating anti-tank capability in specialized vehicles or heavy weapons. A company of infantry with anti-tank weapons could hold terrain that a battalion without them would lose to armored attack. American combined arms doctrine, validated in the Bulge, became NATO standard. The integration of armor, mechanized infantry, artillery, combat engineers, and air support into cohesive combined arms teams became the foundation of Western military organization. Soviet doctrine evolved similarly, though with different emphases. But perhaps the most significant technical legacy was logistics. Kampfgruppe Peiper's destruction wasn't primarily due to American tactical superiority, it was due to fuel starvation. The offensive failed because German logistics couldn't sustain it. Post-war military planning universally recognized that operational success required logistics capabilities equal to combat capabilities. The U.S. Army's post-war evolution reflected this lesson. Supply units, maintenance battalions, and transportation companies received emphasis equal to combat arms. The ability to move fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and supplies forward became as important as the ability to move combat units. The Malmedy Massacre entered American cultural memory in ways other Battle of the Bulge engagements didn't. Part of this was timing. The massacre occurred at the battle's beginning, when American forces were reeling from surprise attack and desperate for something to crystallize their purpose. Malmedy provided moral clarity in a confused situation. It transformed the battle from a military setback into a righteous struggle against barbarism. Part was the nature of the crime. Prisoners murdered after surrender violated warfare's most fundamental rule. It was comprehensible to civilian populations in ways that tactical decisions about artillery fire or bombing raids weren't. Everyone understood that shooting prisoners with hands raised was murder. And part was post-war politics. The Malmedy trial became a Cold War controversy, championed by Senator McCarthy as evidence of American injustice. The controversy kept the massacre in public consciousness long after other war crimes trials faded from memory. For veterans, Malmedy remained intensely personal. The Survivors Association maintained contact for decades. They lobbied for recognition, testified at trials, and ensured the story wasn't forgotten. Harold Billow's 84 flags, one for each victim, flying in his Pennsylvania front yard, became a physical manifestation of memory that refused to fade. But memory is selective. Americans remember Malmedy, few remember Chinon. We remember German atrocities, we forget American reprisals. This selective memory serves psychological purposes. It maintains clear moral distinctions between us and them, between righteous cause and barbaric enemy. The historical reality is more complex. Both sides committed atrocities. Both sides had reasons, tactical necessity, revenge, fear, hatred. Both sides violated laws of war. The difference wasn't moral superiority. It was that American atrocities were responses to German atrocities, reactive rather than proactive, revenge rather than policy. That distinction matters legally and morally.
but it's smaller than Americans prefer to believe. In 1981, Charles B. MacDonald, a company commander who fought in the Battle of the Bulge and later became the U.S. Army's chief historian, published the official Army history of the campaign. His chapter on Malmedy concluded with a passage that captures the massacre's enduring significance. The Malmedy Massacre and the murders of other American prisoners and Belgian civilians during the German offensive constituted one of the most serious war crimes committed against American troops during World War II. The events at Malmedy and elsewhere demonstrated that the SS as an organization had institutionalized brutality to a degree that transcended individual culpability. The massacre was not an aberration committed by rogue soldiers. It was the logical outcome of an ideology that valued ruthlessness over humanity. MacDonald's words, written by a combat veteran who became a historian, acknowledged complexity while maintaining moral clarity. Yes, the massacre reflected SS institutional culture. Yes, it resulted from ideology, but it was also murder, premeditated, deliberate, inexcusable. The American response, revenge killings at Chinon and elsewhere, reflected different origins. Not ideology, but rage. Not institutional policy, but individual reactions to horror. This distinction mattered morally, even if it didn't change the fundamental reality that prisoners on both sides died with hands raised. The technical and tactical lessons of the Battle of the Bulge, combined arms integration, logistics primacy, operational flexibility over tactical superiority, shaped military development for decades. But Malmedy's lesson was simpler and darker, that modern warfare's technical sophistication coexists with its most primitive brutalities, that soldiers equipped with radios and radar still make the ancient choice between mercy and murder, that revenge is a weapon as powerful as any in the arsenal. 79 years after those frozen December days, the Ardennes crossroads is peaceful. The field where 84 Americans died is farmland. The roads where king tigers rolled are paved highways. The forests where desperate battles raged have regrown. But the moral questions Malmedy raised remain unresolved. When does revenge become justice? When does tactical necessity excuse atrocity? How do soldiers maintain humanity in inhuman circumstances? When does the enemy's brutality justify reciprocal brutality? These questions have no comfortable answers. They didn't in 1944, they don't today. Sergeant Henry Roy Zack, who survived by playing dead under corpses, spent the rest of his life trying to articulate what happened in that field. In his final interview before his death in 2002, he said simply, "I survived. 84 of my buddies didn't. That's what I remember. That's what I'll always remember." The frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge is history, but its lessons, technical, tactical, and moral, remain present. They remind us that warfare's evolution hasn't eliminated its barbarity, that advanced weapons don't guarantee advanced morality, and that the choice between civilization and savagery is made not by politicians or generals, but by individual soldiers in moments of extremity. At Ardennes, some made the choice for savagery. At Chinon, others made the same choice for different reasons. Neither choice can be unmade, both must be remembered. That's the Malmedy Massacre's ultimate legacy, not just what happened in that frozen field, but what happened afterward, what it revealed about warfare's nature, and what it taught about the distance between humanity and horror when men are armed, afraid, and angry. The distance, it turned out, was shorter than anyone wanted to believe.